a Sapphire Running Zone podcast.
Hi everyone, it's Tim from the Sapphire Running Zone, and today we're going to look at training plans, the importance of training plans. And this is another in our series on training support, probably the most important podcast of all. Why do we need a training plan? Because we all do need one, whatever our aspirations. So whether it be training for an event, training to lose weight, just training for health and fitness reasons, you've got to have some sort of focus and you've got to have some goals. So to start with, I'm going to look at the principles of training. I know it sounds a bit boring, but it's really important to understand that every decent training plan must include these four principles. If it doesn't, and 99% of them do, if it doesn't, then it's no good for you. And these four principles will explain why training plans are built as they are. So the first one is progression. So if we're training for an event, for example, then we want to get slightly better and we need to head towards our goal in a really slow, measured way. So it's about adding a little bit more time each week, never pushing yourself to a point where you are completely, totally uncomfortable. So this really goes back to the point when you see a lot of people when they start running, their first session will basically be they run until they can't run anymore, until they're that shattered that they almost collapse. So many people do this and then they don't want to do it again. Whereas actually what you should do is run to the, even if it's a minute, because then the next session you do is 2 minutes and 3 minutes and so on. So this is the principle of very gradual progression. And this is the cornerstone of all of your training. So not only do we, if you train for a half marathon or a marathon, for example, your long run is the focus of your training program, but it's based on progression. So you gradually, every weekend or whenever you do those long runs, add a little bit more time and distance to that long run. So this is the principle of progression. And then we've got the principle of specificity. Try and say that one. It's about focusing on the discipline you've chosen. So in other words, if you're training to run something, then your plan has to be focused on running. Sounds really obvious, but there are so many people who are doing a training plan, whatever it be, for a half marathon, 10K or whatever, and their focus is on cycling or swimming or cross training or just building muscle in the gym. Well, that isn't going to cut it when it comes to your running goal. So specificity is so important, as is the third principle, which is individualization. And this is about understanding that every one of us is slightly different when it comes to your training and the way that you develop as a runner. So this is where it's important to understand that it isn't easy necessarily just to go running with a mate all the time, right? We're both going to train for a half marathon together. It doesn't always quite work like that because you're not always going to be at the same fitness level. You're not going to develop as a runner in quite the same way, potentially. You might, and that's fantastic if that happens, but don't assume it's going to. Everybody is different and you'll respond differently to your training plan. So some people will enjoy the runs during the week a little bit more than they might the long run. They might not be able to add the same level of distance as their friend might. So just bear that in mind when you're planning to do a run with someone. The other principle, the fourth principle, is overload. And this isn't overtraining. This is overload, which is an important part of an endurance running training plan. It's the increased exposure to an increased training workload with the right level of rest. And it's always good to know that rest is an important part of your training plan. Well, it is, because it's part of this overload principle. So it's making sure that you do your long run on a Saturday. Ideally, you want a rest day on a Friday and on a Sunday to give your body time to prepare and then time to recover. So that's the principle of overload. So basically, these four principles are all part of your training plan, okay? And if you ignore any of them, then your training will be extremely difficult. If you do ignore any of them, then chances are you're not therefore following your training plan. But it is so important to keep these at the forefront of everything that you do. So what exactly is a training plan? Well, they can be very, very different. And you will, if you just have a look around online, you'll see the variety of training plans that are available. Some of them are very, very, very detailed. Some can be just a PDF with the day of the week and the distance or the time you've got to run, and that's it. There's no explanation, nothing. Ideally, you want some which put it all into context, which explain what it's all about, what you need to be eating and drinking that week, etc. So a bit more detail, a bit more meat on the bones. A marathon training plan, for example, similar to a half marathon, could be 16 to 20 weeks. And potentially, well, ideally, they should be split into a beginner, an intermediate, and advanced runner training plan. Because clearly, if you're aiming for a 3-hour marathon, that would be a very different training plan to someone who wants to do a 6-hour marathon. So make sure you're picking the right one. They obviously focus on these 4 principles that we've talked about, and they've been honed over a period of time to the point now where you follow one of those properly and you will perform on the day and you will be close to achieving your goal. So there's no leaving anything to chance. Follow the plan properly and you'll get to where you want to be going. So some of the key areas here are, let's talk firstly about undertraining and burnout. So 2 opposite concepts. If you've not run a distance event before, or you've not achieved your weight loss goal before, how will you know if you've done enough training if you don't follow a training plan? How will you prevent burnout if you don't follow a training plan? So basically, these give you the tools to be able to ensure that you don't do either of these things, because there's nothing worse. Let's go back to marathon running again, or half marathon running, 10K. There's nothing worse than getting to the end of a training plan and not being ready for what you want to do. So it is possible you could run for 16 weeks, 20 weeks, and be nowhere near ready to do a marathon if you haven't followed the right plan. If you've got one for the wrong type of runner or the wrong distance, or you haven't used one at all, but you've just been going out running 2 or 3 times, 3 or 4 times a week, because that's what you've heard you need to do. But you've had no guidance because you've not had a plan. So you've almost been making it up as you go along. And loads of people do this. And sometimes people are okay and they get it right. But without that guidance from a training plan, you could be totally undercooked on the day. Alternatively, you could be totally overcooked and you might not even be able to get to the 20th week of your training plan. Of your goals, because alternatively, you could be overcooked. You get to race day and you're absolutely destroyed because you haven't done the right level. You might have even done 25, 26, 27 on a long run. You might have run 6 days a week because that's what you've heard you should be doing. If you don't follow the plan, how are you going to know how to prevent undertraining and burnout? With a training plan, you'll be able to monitor exactly how you're performing. You'll know when you're ticking off these interim goals. You'll be able to tick off these long runs. If you don't record your progress without a plan and without recording, how will you know whether you're right or wrong? So it doesn't have to be hugely technical. Might be you're using a running app and you can record your progress on the app. But with the plan, you'll be able to then tick off your progress against where you should be at a given time. So it's really important that you monitor your performance throughout the plan. You're in charge. Don't forget that. You can have your goal, got your training plan, but you are in charge. You make a decision as to what you're going to do each day. They are there for you. So if you need to move things around a little bit, you can do. But ideally, if you've got a long run planned, and there's a big family function or a big meet up with your mates, get it on a rest day. Don't move stuff. Don't move your key milestones within your plan around too much. It is a guide, so it is about runs during the week to build up your legs and your heart and lungs for the long run of the weekend. But don't move too many of those big key milestones around too much. It basically gives you guidance as to what you should be doing when, and you should try and stick to that as much as you can. So, for example, if you've got 2 long runs scheduled, one Saturday, one another Saturday, and you've got 2 big family functions on those 2 Saturdays, just remember that you do need to do those long runs. So don't think, oh, well, I'll leave those 2 and then I'll come back to it and pick it up where I should be on that 3rd week. You need to make sure that you are getting on with those long runs. So potentially you could do them on the Sunday, but of course you don't want to be eating and drinking too much on the Saturday. So use the training plan as a guide, but don't move stuff around too much. If you use your plan properly, and these plans have been written with this in mind, the chance of getting an injury is really, really reduced. Okay, we're all likely at some point to get some kind of niggle or some irritation, which a lot of the times you can work through. But without a training plan, it's very, very likely that you will get an injury, and potentially a more significant one, because you're not using any guide to reduce the chances of an injury. Chances are that your body is not going to be prepared in the same way that it would be if you were following a training plan properly. So will the principle of progression be used in your made up plan? In other words, your body might go from a 5-mile run to a 10-mile run one weekend. Well, that's just no good at all. You need to be gradually increasing it. So your body, your knees particularly, get used to these changes of distance. You have to do it gradually. So if you're going from 5 to 10 miles, you would go 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10. You wouldn't go 5 to 10. Your training plan will ensure that that happens. And if you don't use it, you may well make a big mistake, which could then cause you an injury. So you need to be really aware of that. We touched on flexibility a little bit a few minutes ago when we were talking about moving events around within your plan, so your long runs around, etc. You can do that, but what the training plan is built to incorporate is for you to be able to take the odd day off if you're not feeling right, or to adjust one of your shorter runs during the week and add a bit more to one of the other days. So assume you're doing a long run plus 3 days, 3 runs on 3 other days. You can move the distance around a little bit within those days. It's the principles that we're looking for here. So it might say you might get to a point in your plan where you've got to do 4 miles, 3 miles and 4 miles during the week, building up to, say, an 8-mile long run. You can move those around a little bit. So there is flexibility. So don't feel that you have to be absolutely sticking to the minutiae of the plan. There are elements of flexibility within it, which is really, really important for you to follow. And of course, it may well be that you've started an intermediate plan, it's proven a bit much, so you need to change it. You maybe need to go back to a beginner plan, or you're at the advanced and you need to go back to an intermediate plan. The plans will allow you to do that fairly easily. It's going to be a bit harder if you want to go from a beginner to an intermediate. You may need to allow yourself a little bit more time to build up to the mileage that you need for an intermediate. The intermediate might also include hill sessions or interval sessions, which the beginner plan might not include. There's also, of course, the need flexibility in these plans to allow you to take a bit of time off if you have illness, for example. And, we all have, particularly in the winter when you're training for a spring marathon, you're going to be exposed to all sorts of viruses, etc. So it may well be that you'll need to take a week or 2 off. Well, the obvious thing is that you extend the level of the length of your plan. If you can't do that because you are on a tight time frame, your event's not far away, don't load extra mileage into the plan if you're not ready to do that. So it may be that you have to reduce your expectations on the long run. So your longest run, instead of it being, say, 10 miles for a half marathon, might end up being 9 miles. You need to, if you're going to extend the plan, you need to then pull back a bit on the expectations at the end of the plan, rather than loading loads more mileage into it. A lot of people try and do that. They get to a point where they think, oh, I've missed a week or 2 weeks, so I'm going to have to put that missed time in somewhere into the plan, load in those extra miles. Don't do that. That's when you'll put pressure on yourself, and that's when you will get injured. Okay. So it's really, really important that you focus on your end goal and just rein that in a little bit, just so you don't get yourself injured. So what sort of plan should you actually go for? Well, there's so many options these days. I mean, most people are obviously using apps now where it records it for you and ticks it off against a plan that you will have secured via that app. So it does it automatically. As I said before, a lot of people are still using PDFs where they'll just tick it off when they come back. And there's some that keep very meticulous records of their runs. So they'll get a training plan on a PDF or just download it from somewhere, and then they will manually record their runs. And there's something quite satisfying about coming back from a run and actually writing down what you've done. There's so many options. I'd love you to use one of ours, obviously, but there are so many options, and you need to think carefully about it. But any of the reputable running magazines or websites will, you can trust their plans. That's the key. If you're tempted to just go with a plan from someone that's done a run before, just be a bit cautious of that, because they might not have had the experience and they might not be able to take into account certain things that have happened on runs in the past. So just be cautious. You can't go wrong with some of the well-established ones, that's for sure. But yeah, it just depends on how you want to record your runs and how you want to view them before you go. But clearly the apps are increasingly popular now, so lots of options. Right, so we've got some questions, and the first one is from Joe in Milton Keynes, and Joe says, can I run with a friend or with a group? And this comes back to the point of one of the 4 training principles that we spoke about at the start, about the principle of individualization. So yeah, of course you can run with people pretty much, very regularly, but just be aware that you might not be at the same pace. They might not be at your pace. You might not be at theirs. And it can cause you a few challenges and potentially lead to injuries if you're going at the wrong pace. The running clubs are great because they generally will have people of multiple paces. So if you join a running club and you want to do a 10K in an hour, then they'll have a group for that. And they'll also have a group probably for an hour and 15, an hour and 20, hour and 30, etc. Or there will be little breakaway groups within the bigger group. So there'll always be someone to run with, and they are very good at being able to see the pace you should be running at and get you a running buddy for that pace. If you just want to run with a friend once or twice a week, absolutely no problem. My only caution would be is on those long runs where that's the heartbeat of your training plan, and you need to absolutely make sure you're going at the right pace. Will you get someone who wants to drink at the same time, wants an energy gel at the same time? You might, but I'm not sure you're likely to. So Joe, basically, yes, of course you can, but just be a little bit cautious. And then we've got Andy from Cardiff who says, do I need to do hills and repetitions, intervals work if I'm doing a beginner half marathon plan? And the answer is no, you don't. you may well live in a place where you don't have a lot of choice when it comes to the hills. There's obviously some very, very hilly parts of the world, and you may just automatically have those built into your schedule. And if you do, then that's great, because that's likely to help you if you're doing an event on a flat course. But you don't need to go seeking out hills on a beginner plan. Same with repetitions and interval work. You don't need to do that. Generally speaking, people tend to focus on that kind of activity when they're trying to get a better time. So when they're really pushing, like on marathon training, when they're pushing from 3:30 to 3:15 to 3-hour marathon finish time expectation, then that's when you do a lot of track work and these intervals, etc. So no need, if you're literally looking at a get me round schedule, you don't need to worry too much about that. And then we've got Kathy from Aberdeen, who has been looking at some training plans and has some questions around ones that have a sort of easy week, harder week, easy week sort of approach. So there's quite a few plans that do this, and this is basically about giving your body a chance to rest and recover a little bit before it moves on to its next level. And that's great. And most training plans will generally have, during the week, you won't be doing just 3 5-mile runs. It might be 5 3 5 or 5 4 3 or whatever, and just give your body a chance to recover a little bit. More often than not, the long run at the weekend will be gradually increased from the previous week, but it might not be. There might be some occasions where you will go from, I don't know, an 11-mile long run back to a 10, then up to a 12, then up to 13, then back to 12. So you sometimes get that on plans. And that's great. That's great. That's just a way of giving your body a chance to recover a little bit. So, yeah, there's nothing to be concerned about if you don't see the distance or the time increasing every week. But it would be unusual in a plan that your midweek runs are always getting further, more time on your feet. You would generally expect some degree of consolidation, and that's really what this is all about. It's about the consolidation. So you're not having to go further all the time. You need to get some stability in your plan, and that's what that's all about. Hope that's helped. Anyone's got any questions at all on training plans, give me a shout. But it's absolutely the key to a successful running career. Whatever your aspirations, get yourself a training plan. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks for listening to this Sapphire Running Zone podcast. Keep checking back as we have lots more podcasts coming soon.